My boyfriend told his entire friend group our baby, probably isn't even his because I'm that type of girl, started a group chat poll with 15 guys voting on who she really slept with, including his own brother and my male coworkers. Then announced at his family's 4th of July barbecue in front of 50 people that he's getting a DNA test to finally expose this lying girl. His mom stood up and hugged him saying, "I'm so proud you're not letting her trap you like your father." His drunk uncle started a slow clap. His sister filmed my face for the family group chat. His friends cornered me in the kitchen calling me every name imaginable while their girlfriends laughed. Someone keyed cheater into my car that night. Now I have 33 unread messages. Please just answer. We didn't mean it. I still remember walking into that backyard, thinking it would be just another weekend barbecue, a simple celebration, maybe a few laughs and the smell of grilled corn in the air, never imagining that every person around me would suddenly become a jury. A spectator and a judge all at once, watching me like I was a character in some cruel play I didn't audition for. And then I heard it, his voice cutting through the hum of chatter like a knife, loud, proud, and impossibly cruel, telling every single person there that he was getting a DNA test to finally expose me, because according to him, our baby probably wasn't even his, and that I was that type of girl. Words that hung in the air heavy enough to make my chest ache and my knees feel like they were folding under the weight of humiliation. I froze, heart pounding, breath shallow, watching as his friends smirked and whispered, nudging each other as if I was nothing more than entertainment, and then I heard about the group chat he created, 15 guys voting on who I had supposedly been with, dragging in the names of people who had no idea they were even part of this nightmare, including his own brother and some of my male coworkers, like a public scavenger hunt for my supposed lies, a twisted game where my life was the prize. And everyone else was cheering without even realizing how broken I felt inside. His mother hugged him, beaming, whispering words of pride as if he'd done something heroic, telling him he wasn't going to be trapped like his father, and I could see it, the way everyone was nodding, the slow clap from his drunk uncle echoing across the yard. A sound that felt like it was sealing my humiliation into memory, and his sister, with her phone raised, recording my face as if it were proof that I was the villain in her family's story, a clip that would be shared and replayed endlessly while I sat there, trembling but refusing to cry, refusing to give them the satisfaction of breaking in front of 50 people who had already decided I was guilty before I even spoke. They cornered me in the kitchen next, friends whispering insults, girlfriends laughing, words cutting into me sharper than any knife could, each syllable a reminder that I was alone in a crowd, unseen, unheard, and yet entirely exposed. And when I stepped outside to breathe, I saw the word cheater scratched into my car, jagged and deliberate, a message not just on metal, but etched into the beginning of a story I hadn't asked to be part of, and that's when my phone started blowing up, messages flooding in from people who suddenly realized the chaos had gone too far, texts begging, pleading, apologizing, and I didn't respond because every word I might send could be twisted, could be weaponized against me again. And I realized that in order to survive this, I needed more than explanations. I needed strategy, presence, and a way to reclaim my story from the people who had already announced its ending. And that's when I decided that I wouldn't react impulsively. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't argue. I would watch. I would document. I would move carefully, step by step, so that every word, every action, every tiny interaction became a quiet countermeasure to the chaos he created, because humiliation is only powerful if you let it define you, and I wasn't going to give him that power. Not here, not now, not ever. I stayed quiet for a moment, letting the chaos swirl around me, feeling the heat rise to my cheeks, but refusing to let it burn away my composure, because I realized that the more I reacted, the more control he and his friends would have over the narrative. And so I smiled slightly, almost imperceptibly, and stepped back into the crowd as if nothing had happened, while my mind raced, cataloging every word, every glance, every smirk, every laugh, and storing it like evidence for the day when their arrogance would meet its match, because people rarely understand that power doesn't always come from yelling the loudest or humiliating the weakest. Sometimes, it comes from patience, from presence, from watching carefully while the world convinces itself that it's winning. They didn't know I was already planning my next moves, that every poll, every insult, every public accusation would become a thread I could pull, unraveling the false narrative they had created. And as I navigated the crowded backyard, greeting neighbors with the same calm tone I always used, nodding at people, acknowledging smiles while my heart thumped wildly, I realized that humiliation is heavy only when you carry it alone, but if you begin to gather clarity, witnesses, and your own internal strength, it turns into fuel, it turns into strategy, it turns into something they cannot touch. I noticed his friends glancing at me, whispering, expecting me to snap, to crumble, to deny, to beg anything to reinforce their cruel little game. But I didn't. I watched his mother beam at him, oblivious to the layers of manipulation unfolding right under her nose. I watched his uncle clap drunkenly, thinking it was all entertainment. I watched his sister recording, thinking she had captured my shame. And I realized something terrifyingly beautiful. None of their confidence was real, it was performance, and performances can crumble when the audience stops applauding and the main character takes control. I moved toward the edge of the yard, pretending to check my phone, watching him in silent observation as he recounted my lies to anyone who would listen, embellishing stories, dragging names into the narrative that weren't mine to give. And I thought about the messages piling up on my phone, the texts that were desperate, frantic, 33 of them already, and I decided that I would answer them not with anger, not with defense, but with a quiet calm that would make them rethink everything they had done, because when people are desperate to be forgiven or justified, it exposes the weakness behind their cruelty more than any shouting ever could. I walked slowly back into the crowd as if nothing had changed, greeting him politely, smiling, letting him think he still controlled the room, while inside, I was plotting, measuring, understanding, remembering that every person who laughed, every person who whispered, every person who judged me had now become part of the audience for my own plan, and they had no idea that their own arrogance had just handed me the leverage I needed, and that the moment I chose to act, every lie, every insult, every poll, every public declaration would turn against them in ways they could never anticipate. Because in the end, I realized that humiliation is temporary, but presence, strategy, and patience are eternal, and the moment you decide not to give your power away, even the loudest voices fade into the background, leaving only the truth, sharp, undeniable, and unstoppable. I could feel the weight of every stare, every judgmental glance, every whisper that wasn't meant for my ears, but instead of shrinking, I let it sharpen me, like a blade forged slowly in fire, because I knew that the more they assumed I was broken, the more they exposed their own arrogance, and I began to walk through that backyard as if it were my own stage, each step deliberate, each movement calm, each smile carefully measured to look polite but carry the quiet force of someone who sees. Through every lie, every insult, every petty display of power that had been thrown at me, and I could feel them noticing it, subtle shifts in posture, the hesitation in their smirks, the uncertainty creeping into their laughter as if they suddenly realized that I wasn't the victim they thought I had cornered. He approached me, grinning, trying to act as though his DNA test declaration had been clever, like he had outsmarted me in some elaborate scheme, and he leaned in slightly, lowering his voice, thinking I wouldn't hear him over the chatter, saying things like, "You better explain yourself before everyone starts believing you're lying." But I didn't respond immediately, I didn't defend, I didn't flinch, because I had realized that reacting to his venom was exactly what he wanted, and I had no intention of feeding the spectacle he craved. Instead, I let my eyes meet his briefly, holding his gaze just long enough for him to feel a flicker of uncertainty, and then I smiled politely and walked away, letting him stew in the tension he had created. I could hear his friends snickering behind me, thinking the joke was still theirs, thinking that the control they had displayed over me in the poll, in the kitchen, in front of 50 people, was unshakable, but every step I took was planting seeds of doubt. Every nod, every measured word, every quiet observation was building a map of their arrogance that I would follow to the letter when the time came, and in that moment I understood something crucial. You can't control people by shaming them if they don't give you the satisfaction of shame, and when they realize that the person they thought powerless is calm, collected, and quietly documenting every move, panic begins to seep into their performance. I noticed the subtle glances, the quick checks of phones, the whispers growing just a little too loud, the way he started trying to justify his actions to anyone who would listen, almost pleading for validation from people who had already been complicit in his cruelty, and I realized with a cold clarity that the moment of reckoning was approaching, not because I would shout, not because I would make a scene, but because their own arrogance, their own eagerness to humiliate me publicly, had left them vulnerable to being exposed in ways they hadn't imagined, and I would not need to raise my voice, because the evidence, the witnesses, and the undeniable truth were already working quietly, invisibly, and irreversibly against them. By the time I left the backyard, I wasn't trembling, I wasn't broken, I wasn't humiliated, I was focused, aware, and patient, because I had learned that revenge doesn't always need to be loud, and that the most powerful victories are the ones where the world thinks they are still in control while quietly, behind the scenes, you are turning every lie, every insult, and every poll against them in ways they will never see coming. And I walked to my car that night knowing that the story was far from over, that the humiliation they had tried to inflict was only the beginning of a plan I was about to execute, and that for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the calm, terrifying strength of someone who is no longer afraid of what others think. I returned home that night, the city lights blurring past my car window, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly I could feel my knuckles whitening, and yet inside, a strange calm had settled over me, a clarity I had never felt before. Because I knew that humiliation only has power if you allow it to define you, and I refused to let him, or anyone who had laughed at me, shape the story of my life. And while the texts piled up, 33 unread messages flashing on my screen. Desperate, pleading, apologizing, I ignored them all, letting the world believe that I was still shaken when, in reality, I was already preparing every move, every word, every subtle action that would quietly, but utterly, turn this nightmare around. The next day, I walked into my office as if nothing had happened, smiling, exchanging polite greetings, but every interaction, every casual laugh, every nod was calculated, because I knew that the people who had cornered me voted on my supposed betrayal, and whispered insults, thought that my silence was weakness, and I let them believe that while secretly I was gathering evidence, collecting proof of everything, capturing moments, remembering every face, every smirk, every word. Because the power of patience, the power of watching, is far greater than the power of reaction, and soon, very soon, the tables would turn. That evening, he tried to corner me again, approaching me in the kitchen of my own home as if our private space gave him some authority, trying to justify his actions, trying to explain the poll, trying to laugh off the accusations he had made in front of 50 people, but I didn't flinch, I didn't raise my voice, I didn't respond with anger. I simply met his eyes and let silence do the work, letting him feel the weight of my calm. The quiet intensity of someone who is no longer afraid, and as he stumbled for words, I could see the first flicker of panic, the first realization that maybe his plan wasn't as foolproof as he had imagined. I began to notice subtle cracks, the way his friends glanced at each other nervously, the hesitation in their laughter, the way his sister lowered her phone for a second too long, the way his mother's proud smile wavered slightly as if she sensed the shift in the air. And I understood then that when arrogance and cruelty are unchecked for too long, the universe always finds a way to balance the scales, and patience becomes the sharpest weapon, because while they were busy assuming my fear, I was orchestrating the quiet, unstoppable collapse of their little kingdom of humiliation. I walked past him, past the whispers, past the judgment, past the laughter, and I felt the power of observation settling deep inside me, knowing that the more I let them believe they were still in control, the faster their own mistakes, their own cruelty, would unravel, and that the moment I chose to act, the humiliation they had tried to inflict would be nothing compared to the reckoning I had meticulously planned in silence. And as I stood there, calm, composed, and unbroken, I realized that revenge doesn't always need to be loud, because the quiet force of someone who has been pushed to the edge is far more terrifying than any public spectacle. And so I waited, watching, listening, learning, letting every poll, every insult, every text, every cruel laugh become part of the map I was drawing in my mind, knowing that when the time came, nothing would be left unturned, nothing would be unaddressed, and that their arrogance, their cruelty, and their public performance would all work against them in a way they could never anticipate, because I was no longer just the person they humiliated, I was the storm they had invited into their world. And they had no idea it had already begun. The following hours felt like walking through a battlefield dressed in calm, because every glance, every whisper, every phone notification became a pulse I could measure, and I realized that humiliation isn't just loud declarations or scratched messages on a car. It's the way people try to manipulate your perception, your emotions, your reality, and as I sat quietly scrolling through the barrage of frantic texts, each one more desperate than the last, I smiled slightly, because their panic, their guilt, their frantic need for my attention, was proof that the storm I had begun was already forming, invisible to them but growing stronger with every heartbeat, every calculated step I had taken, since that backyard became the stage for their cruelty. I began to respond, not with explanations, not with apologies, not with tears, but with questions that made them squirm, messages that reminded them of their own complicity, subtle hints that I had seen, I had documented, I had remembered everything. And the reactions were immediate, frantic, confused, defensive, because suddenly they realized that I wasn't broken, that I wasn't panicking, that the power they thought they had spent months building through laughter, mockery, and public accusations was slipping quietly through their fingers, and for the first time, I could feel them doubting themselves, questioning what they had done, questioning how they could have been so sure of my weakness when in reality, it was their own arrogance that had blinded them. He tried to confront me again, cornering me at a cafe, his voice raised, his words sharp, his tone demanding, but I met him calmly, speaking slowly, deliberately, choosing every word like a scalpel, dissecting his logic, exposing his lies, pointing out the contradictions in the stories he had told in front of 50 witnesses, in group chats, to friends, to family, and I could see the confusion growing, the frustration mounting, the anger twisting into panic, because no one had ever expected that the person they tried to destroy would do so with quiet, controlled precision, turning their own cruelty against them without ever raising a hand in anger, without ever breaking a sweat, without ever showing the fear they had tried to instill. And then came the small victories, friends sending messages confessing things they had whispered in that backyard, texts from people who realized too late that they had been part of the cruelty, and each message, each apology, each tiny acknowledgement of their wrongdoing fed the plan I had been constructing in silence, because the most powerful revenge isn't loud, it's quiet, it's invisible, it's patient, and it arrives when the perpetrators are least expecting it, thinking that everything remains under their control while their own missteps are being documented, observed, and turned into undeniable proof of their arrogance and cruelty. By the end of the evening, I could see the cracks widening, subtle shifts in behavior, hesitant glances, nervous laughter, and a weight settling over them that I knew I had not placed, but that they had earned. A combination of guilt, fear, and realization that nothing, no performance, no mockery, no public accusation, could undo the truth that I was calm, I was aware, and I was finally in control. And as I walked away from the confrontation, feeling the quiet power settling over me like armor, I understood fully for the first time that humiliation is temporary, arrogance is fragile, and the person who is underestimated the most often holds the sharpest edge of all. By the time I arrived at the next gathering, the tension in the room was palpable, not because I had shouted, not because I had revealed their lies, but because the calm confidence I carried made every person who had humiliated me aware that they were no longer in control, and I could feel it in the way their eyes flickered toward me, the way conversations paused when I entered, the subtle hesitations. The tiny slips in body language, because arrogance cracks when it realizes it underestimated the person it tried to break, and I reveled quietly in the knowledge that my patience had transformed their cruelty into a weapon they couldn't use. He tried again, standing close, voice low but venomous, leaning in as if proximity could force a reaction, and I let him speak, letting every accusation, every threat, every attempt at intimidation roll over me like water on stone. Because I knew the power of silence, the power of observation, and the power of letting someone reveal themselves without interference, and as he sputtered, growing more frustrated with each word, I realized that the fear he had hoped to inspire in me had flipped. Completely, now it was him who was on the edge, unsure, panicked, and vulnerable, while I remained composed, deliberate, and fully aware of the game I was winning quietly. Friends and family tried to fill the gaps, whispering, nudging, laughing nervously, but every word they uttered, every glance they shared, became part of the record in my mind, a network of proof that would stand as undeniable evidence of the cruelty, humiliation, and public spectacle they had orchestrated, and I felt a strange satisfaction watching their own insecurities rise to the surface, because when people invest in shaming someone, they forget how fragile their own confidence is, and now, without me ever raising my voice, without me ever letting the world see my anger, they were crumbling from the inside out. I noticed him checking his phone constantly, probably reading the messages I had sent quietly over the past days, ones that teased, hinted, and exposed the cracks in their story, and with each glance I caught, I saw panic growing. A recognition that the narrative they had tried to control was slipping through their fingers, and that all the humiliation, the laughter, the public accusations, the scratched messages on my car, all of it, had been transformed into a quiet, undeniable leverage. One that would force them to reckon with the consequences of their actions in ways they could never have predicted. By the end of the evening, I had already set in motion the next steps, subtle moves, quiet maneuvers that would continue to expose their arrogance and cruelty while keeping me untouchable, and as I left the room, feeling the weight of their unspoken fear, I understood fully that patience, presence, and observation are far more powerful than anger or revenge shouted aloud, because the people who underestimated me had already handed me the keys to their own unraveling, and I was holding them firmly in my hands, ready to turn the next page on a story that they thought they had written, never realizing that I was the author all along. The day finally arrived when everything they had built, the lies, the polls, the public accusations, the whispers, the laughter, the scratches on my car, came back to meet them, and I didn't raise my voice, I didn't scream, I didn't beg for justice. I simply stood, calm and composed, letting the room feel the weight of my presence, and I could see it instantly. The hesitation, the small flickers of fear, the tiny cracks in their arrogance that had seemed so invincible just days before, because cruelty always leaves a mark, and the moment patience meets opportunity, the mark turns into leverage that cannot be denied. He tried to approach me, smirking, trying to act as though nothing had changed, trying to charm, to explain, to twist reality in front of everyone, but I stopped him with one look, quiet, controlled, a glance that carried the weight of every insult. Every public humiliation, every vote in that group chat, every snicker, and every mocking laugh, and suddenly, the confident grin faltered, the words stuck in his throat, and I could see the realization dawning that the power he had thought he wielded was gone, quietly, irreversibly, and entirely in my hands. I addressed the room, calm but piercing, telling the story of what had happened, not as accusations, not as anger, not as cries for sympathy, but as undeniable truth, carefully walking through every detail, every poll, every comment, every cruel act, letting the audience feel the absurdity, the cruelty, the arrogance that had driven them to treat me as a villain when I was only the target of their insecurities. And as each person listened, each face shifted, each whisper ceased, because the weight of truth is heavier than any lie shouted in a crowded backyard. Friends, family, everyone who had once laughed now looked uneasy, unsure, realizing that their amusement had contributed to someone else's torment, and the panic in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the faltering steps, all confirmed what I already knew. Humiliation only lasts as long as the victim allows, and when the victim stands quietly, strategically, and with undeniable evidence, the roles reverse completely, and the arrogant crumble quietly in front of the world they thought they controlled. By the time the room settled, I had already taken the steps I needed to reclaim every ounce of dignity, every shred of respect, and every part of my narrative that had been hijacked, and I could feel the power shift fully, finally, undeniably. Because revenge doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with patience, observation, and timing so perfect that the perpetrators never realize they were being disarmed until it is too late. As I walked away that evening, past their awkward glances, past the silences that replaced laughter, past the judgment that had turned into guilt, I realized one undeniable truth. I hadn't just survived the storm they had created. I had transformed it into my victory, and while they spent the next days scrambling, apologizing, and questioning their own actions, I remained untouchable, calm, and fully aware that the humiliation they had tried to force on me had backfired in the most satisfying, powerful way possible, leaving me not just unbroken, but stronger, sharper, and finally in complete control of my own story. And in that moment, as the weight of their arrogance crumbled quietly behind me, I understood fully that revenge isn't about shouting louder than your enemies. It's about standing calmly, letting truth and patience do the work, and watching as the world finally bends to the reality you always knew was yours.